7 years of loyalty shattered in a single sentence. Elena had built an empire beside Victor Hale, the most feared man in the city underworld. She spent her time strategizing in shadows, holding his world together while he rose to power. She thought their anniversary would be a celebration. Instead, he looked at her across a table set for two and said the words that ended everything. He said he wanted a divorce and had already chosen someone else. There was no warning and no apology, just cold finality. But Victor made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed she would break. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. The penthouse was perfect. Elena had spent the entire afternoon making sure of it. Candles lined the marble countertops in the kitchen, their flames steady and golden. The dining table was imported Italian walnut, which was Victor's choice 3 years ago. It was set with their wedding china. They were plates they had used maybe twice since the ceremony. She had ordered from Marchetti's, the only restaurant Victor actually trusted. The food sat under silver warming domes, still hot and flawless. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror one last time. The dress was midnight blue, fitted but not tight, and elegant without trying too hard. Her hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She had stopped wearing it this way years ago because Victor preferred it pinned back, professional, and severe. But tonight felt different. Tonight was theirs. It didn't feel like 7 years. It felt like something longer and shorter at the same time. It felt like she had lived multiple lifetimes inside this one relationship. She remembered the early days so clearly it hurt. She remembered the tiny apartment in South Detroit, the smell of old carpet and radiator heat. Victor would come home at 3 in the morning with blood on his knuckles and ambition in his eyes. Back then, he had needed her. Back then, they had been building something together. Now, they lived 40 floors above the city in a penthouse that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. And she couldn't remember the last time Victor had actually looked at her, but tonight would be different. She glanced at the clock. It was 8:15. He was late, but that was normal. Victor ran half the city underground operations. Lateness came with the territory. She poured herself a glass of wine. It was something expensive from the collection Victor kept but never drank. She settled onto the couch to wait. The skyline stretched out beyond the floor to ceiling windows, a million lights against the darkness. Somewhere down there, Victor was closing a deal or managing a crisis. He was doing whatever it was he did in those hours between work and home. She used to know and used to be part of it. Now, she got summaries and half-truths. She got carefully edited versions of his day that told her nothing real. Her phone buzzed. He texted that he was on his way and would be 20 minutes. She typed back a heart, then deleted it, and sent a simple thumbs-up message instead. The heart felt desperate. 20 minutes turned into 40, but she didn't move the food or blow out the candles. When the elevator finally chimed and the private doors slid open, she stood up. She smoothed her dress and forced her smile into something warm and genuine. Victor stepped into the penthouse. He looked good. He always looked good. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, a black shirt underneath, and no tie. His dark hair was pushed back from his face. Even from across the room, she could see the tension in his shoulders. She saw the way he carried the weight of his empire like armor. He was 42 now, but he could pass for younger. He had a sharp jawline, cold gray eyes, and the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet. He saw her and stopped. She said hey and wished him a happy anniversary. Something crossed his face, surprise maybe or guilt, but it vanished before she could name it. He said right, anniversary. She felt the first crack, small and hairline thin, right in the center of her chest. She kept her voice light and told him she made dinner from Marchetti's, his favorite. Victor walked past her toward the bar instead of the table. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and drank half of it in one swallow. He told her she didn't have to do all this. She replied that she wanted to. He turned, leaning back against the bar, and finally looked at her. He really looked at her. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't love or even affection. It was clinical and distant assessment. He told her to sit down. The crack widened. She said dinner was getting cold. He told her to sit down again. She sat, not at the table, but on the edge of the couch. Her hands were folded in her lap like a child waiting for bad news. Victor stayed at the bar, swirling the scotch in his glass. The silence between them felt like falling. He finally said he had been thinking about them, about where they were and where they had been. He took another drink and said 7 years is a long time. She agreed quietly, saying it was a good long time. He asked if it really was. The question landed like a slap. She looked up at him, searching for the joke or the test. She searched for anything that would make this make sense. But his expression was carved from stone. She said his name and asked what he was saying. He set the glass down on the bar with a soft click and said he wanted a divorce. The room didn't change. The candles kept burning, and the city lights still glittered beyond the windows. But something inside Elena stopped. Her breath, her heartbeat, and maybe her entire understanding of reality just stopped. She asked what he meant. He said he had thought about this for a while. His voice was calm and rational, like he was discussing a business transaction. He said they were not happy and had not been for years. He told her she knew that. She couldn't feel her hands or anything except the white noise rush of panic flooding her system. She asked where this was coming from. He said it was coming from the truth. He picked up his glass again and studied the amber liquid. He said they got married young and built something together, which he wasn't denying. But people change, and situations change. Her voice cracked as she said they should work on it. She hated that it cracked. She said they should figure it out and not just quit. Then she realized there was someone else. The world tilted. Elena stared at him, waiting for him to take it back or laugh. She waited for anything that would make this nightmare rewind. But Victor just stood there, unmoved and untouchable. She whispered that he was having an affair. He said he wouldn't call it that. She asked what he would call it. He told her he would call it moving forward. He finished his drink and said her name was Irina. He said he met her 4 months ago. She was different and younger. She didn't carry all this history. Elena's hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to anchor herself to something solid. She asked if it had been 4 months. He said yes. She asked why he was telling her this now on their anniversary. He claimed the date wasn't intentional. For the first time, something almost like discomfort flickered across his face. He said he wasn't going to lie to her or pretend this was something it wasn't. He wanted out and wanted to move on. He told her that if she was honest with herself, she wanted that too. She sharply told him not to tell her what she wanted. The words came out edged with something that felt like anger, but burned hotter. She told him not to dare stand there and tell her what she wanted. Victor's jaw tightened. He said he was trying to do this cleanly. She laughed, and it sounded unhinged even to her own ears. She asked if he thought there was a clean way to do this after everything. His voice rose slightly, with the first real emotion breaking through. He asked what she meant by everything. He brought up the last 2 years where they barely spoke, and where she walked around the place like a ghost. He asked when the last time was that they had an actual conversation. She stood abruptly, her legs unsteady, and told him to stop. She told him not to make this about her and not to dare make this her fault. He said he wasn't making it anyone's fault. He was just stating facts. She walked toward him, and he actually stepped back. It was a small movement, but she caught it. She gave him her own facts. She told him she was there when he had nothing. She helped him build everything he had. She stood beside him through wars, bloodshed, and every nightmare decision he ever made. She asked if he wanted to trade her in for someone younger now that he was comfortable and powerful. He said it wasn't like that. She demanded he explain it and make it make sense. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened with pity or regret. He told her she had been unhappy for years, and he had seen it. He asked if she thought he hadn't noticed how she disappeared into herself, how she didn't ask questions anymore, and didn't get involved. He said she checked out a long time ago. She exploded, her words raw and desperate. She told him it was because he pushed her out. She reminded him that he stopped telling her things and stopped including her. She said she used to know every plan, every risk, and every move. She was his partner, and then one day she wasn't, and he never even told her why. He said things got complicated. She said she could handle complicated and always had. He said it was different now. His voice went cold and distant again. He said the business was bigger and the stakes were higher. He needed people around him who could operate at that level. The implication hung in the air like poison. She slowly asked if he thought she couldn't operate at that level, or if she wasn't good enough anymore. He said he thought she chose to step back. He claimed she got comfortable being the wife instead of the partner. He said that was fine, and he didn't blame her, but told her not to act like he was the villain when she made that choice herself. She wanted to scream and throw something to make him feel even a fraction of her pain. But instead, she just stood there shaking, staring at the man she had loved for 7 years like he was a stranger. She quietly asked when he decided she wasn't enough. Victor looked away and said that wasn't fair. She told him nothing about this was fair, her voice breaking. She asked if the other woman asked him to leave. She asked if Elena was waiting right now for him to come back and say it was done. She demanded an answer. He said Elena didn't ask for anything, and that this was his decision. Elena sarcastically called him noble. The bitterness in her voice was corrosive. She asked if Elena knew what he really was and what he did, or if he sold her the cleaned-up version. He said she knew enough. Elena doubted that. She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Below, the city sprawled out like a living map of Victor's territory. There were clubs, warehouses, and legitimate businesses fronting illegal operations. She knew where they all were. She had helped place half of them. She told Victor she knew things about him that would destroy him, things that would put him in prison for life, or worse. She heard him move behind her. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. He asked if that was a threat. She turned and said it was a fact, just like the ones he loved so much. They stared at each other across the perfect room with its perfect candles and perfect untouched dinner. Elena realized with crushing clarity that this wasn't a negotiation. Victor hadn't come to discuss or debate. He had come to deliver a verdict. He said he would have his lawyer contact hers. He wanted to make it as smooth as possible. He assured her she would be taken care of financially, stating the prenup was fair. The prenup. She laughed again with that same broken sound. He told her she would be fine. She asked if she really would be. Something flickered in his eyes, but she couldn't tell if it was doubt or guilt. He told her she was stronger than she thought. She whispered for him not to patronize her. Victor grabbed his coat from the back of a chair and headed toward the elevator. She wondered when he had even taken it off. Elena watched him, her mind blank and her body numb. This was happening. This was real. He pressed the button and the doors slid open. She called his name. He paused without turning. She asked in a small voice if he had ever really loved her. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said he thought he did. The elevator doors closed, and he was gone. Elena stood alone in the penthouse. Their penthouse, except it had never really been theirs, had it. It had always been his, just like everything else. She looked at the dining table, at the candles burning down to nothing, at the wine and the perfect china, and the anniversary that had turned into an execution. Very calmly, she walked to the table, picked up her wine glass, and threw it at the window. It shattered against the reinforced glass with a sound like breaking stars. Wine ran down in dark red rivulets, and she watched it drip onto the white carpet, staining everything it touched. She thought she should cry. Normal people would cry, but her eyes were dry, and her breathing was steady. She felt hollowed out and scraped clean, like someone had reached inside her chest and removed everything vital. The candles kept burning. She stood there for hours, or at least it felt like hours, before she moved again. When she finally did, her body felt mechanical and disconnected. She blew out the candles one by one, put the untouched food into containers, and stored it in the refrigerator. She cleared the table and hung her coat in the closet. Then she walked to the bedroom they had shared for 5 years and started packing. She didn't take everything. She only took clothes, toiletries, a few books and personal things. Everything else could burn for all she cared. The designer handbags Victor bought her, the jewelry, the art on the walls, none of it was hers. She had just been borrowing it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said the apartment on 7th Street was ready. The key was with the doorman, and she should take all the time she needed. It was from Marcus, Victor's head of security. He was one of the few people in the organization who had ever treated her like a person instead of a trophy. She typed back a quick thank you and kept packing. By midnight, she was done. She stood in the doorway of the penthouse one last time, looking at the space that had been her prison disguised as paradise. The wine stain on the carpet looked black in the low light. She didn't clean it up. Let Victor explain that to Irina. The apartment on 7th Street was small. It was a studio, barely furnished, the kind of place college students rented. But it was clean and quiet, and most importantly, it was hers. There was no Victor, no memories, and no ghosts. Elena set her bags down and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. The window looked out onto a brick wall. There were no city views, no luxury, just reality. And then finally she cried. She cried for the girl who had believed in love. She cried for the woman who had sacrificed everything for a man who never really saw her. She cried for 7 years of loyalty, rewarded with abandonment. She cried until her throat was raw, her eyes were swollen, and she had nothing left inside. When she was done, she lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere across the city, Victor was probably with Irina, laughing, celebrating, and moving forward, and here she was, alone, starting over at 34 with nothing, except the clothes in her bag and the knowledge that she had helped build an empire she would never see again. She closed her eyes. She told herself that tomorrow she would figure out what came next, but tonight she was allowed to break. The morning came too bright and too early. Elena woke to sunlight cutting through the thin curtains. Her head pounded, and her eyes were crusted with dried tears. For a few blissful seconds, she didn't remember. Then it all came crashing back. She remembered Victor's face, his words, and the casual cruelty of it all. She forced herself out of bed. The bathroom mirror was unkind. Her eyes were puffy, her skin blotchy, and her hair a tangled mess. She looked like someone who had been crying for hours, because she had been. She showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing herself like she could wash away the memory of last night. Then she dressed in jeans and a sweater. They were clothes she hadn't worn in years, comfortable things Victor had always hated, and she stepped out into the world. 7th Street was nothing like the neighborhood she left behind. There were no doormen, no marble lobbies, and no private elevators. It was just regular people living regular lives. There was a bodega on the corner, a laundromat, and a diner with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that cost $2. She walked without direction, letting her feet carry her wherever they wanted. After 20 minutes, she found herself standing outside a small cafe she had never noticed before. Through the window, she could see mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and a barista with pink hair and too many piercings. It looked nothing like the places Victor frequented. She went inside. The coffee was good, actually good, not just expensive. She ordered it black, found a corner table, and sat down with a book she had grabbed from her bag without looking. It turned out to be one she started months ago and never finished. Victor hadn't liked her reading at home. He said it made her distant. She was 3 pages in when someone spoke. A man asked if the seat was taken. She looked up. The man standing there was tall, maybe in his late 30s, with kind eyes and an apologetic smile. He wore a worn leather jacket and carried his coffee in a paper cup. She told him it was all his. He thanked her and said the place was packed. He sat down and pulled out a laptop. He introduced himself as Adrian. She told him her name was Elena. He said it was nice to meet her. He opened his laptop, and that should have been the end of it, just a polite exchange between strangers. But then he asked if it was her first time there. She blinked and asked if it was that obvious. He smiled genuinely and said it was a little bit obvious. He said she had that look of someone who just discovered something good, and that he had the same expression when he found the place 6 months ago. She carefully agreed that it was nice and quiet. He told her they had the best coffee in the neighborhood and didn't water down the espresso. He took a sip of his drink and apologized for interrupting her reading. She realized she was actually smiling and told him it was fine. They talked for 30 minutes, not about anything important, just surface things. Adrian was a freelance photographer. He mostly did corporate work, but sometimes weddings. He moved to the city 5 years ago from Portland. He liked old movies and hated jogging, but did it anyway because his doctor said he should. He didn't ask what she did. He didn't ask about her life. He didn't look at her like she was a puzzle to solve or a possession to acquire. He just talked to her like she was a person. When his phone buzzed and he had to leave for a shoot, he stood up and grabbed his coffee. He paused and told her he was there most mornings around this time, just in case she wanted a coffee buddy. Elena felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't the breaking from last night, but something else. It was something small and tentative and alive. She told him maybe she would see him around. He said he hoped so. He left, and she watched him go, then looked down at her book. She hadn't read a single word since he sat down. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor's lawyer. The message said they should schedule a meeting to discuss terms and asked if she was available that week. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she turned her phone face down on the table and went back to her book. For the first time in 7 years, the world didn't revolve around Victor Hale, and it felt like breathing. The meeting with the lawyer happened 3 days later in a glass tower downtown. The building smelled like expensive cologne and quiet threats. Elena wore black, not because she was mourning, but because it was the only thing in her closet that still felt like armor. The lawyer's name was Richard Moss. He was a man in his 50s with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He sat across from her at a mahogany conference table with a stack of documents between them thick enough to stop a bullet. He called her Mrs. Hale, sliding the first set of papers toward her, and said they should make this simple. Elena didn't touch them. She asked where Victor was. Moss said Mr. Hale felt it would be more productive if they handled the preliminary discussions directly. Elena noted how convenient that was. Moss's smile tightened. He explained that the prenuptial agreement was very clear. She was entitled to a lump sum payment of $2 million, plus the contents of their joint savings account, which currently held approximately $300,000. He added that the penthouse remained Mr. Hale's property, as did all business assets and holdings. $2 million. It sounded like a fortune, but it was nothing compared to what Victor was worth and what they had built together. Elena quietly asked about the businesses she had helped establish. Moss asked which businesses those would be. She listed the shipping company and the real estate holdings in the warehouse district. She noted they were all registered under Victor's name or corporate entities he controlled. Moss opened a folder, scanned a page, and said that according to their records, she held no official position in any of those ventures. Elena explained that was because Victor wanted it that way for protection, so she couldn't be implicated. Moss coldly replied that she should understand why she had no legal claim to them. She understood perfectly. She had been erased. 7 years of strategy, of late nights planning territorial expansions and managing crises, of being the voice of reason when Victor's temper threatened to burn everything down. None of it existed on paper. She had been a ghost helping to build an empire, and now that the empire was solid, the ghost could be dismissed. Moss continued, saying the offer was generous and that Mr. Hale wanted to be fair. Elena repeated the word fair. It tasted like acid. Moss told her she had 48 hours to review the terms with her own counsel, and after that they wanted to proceed quickly. He said Mr. Hale was eager to finalize things. Elena stood up and said she was sure he was. She told Moss to tell Victor she would have her answer soon. Moss called her Mrs. Hale one last time as she left. She corrected him, stating it was Ms. Volkov now. Her maiden name felt strange in her mouth after 7 years, but she was taking it back. She left the building and walked 12 blocks before she realized she had nowhere to go. The apartment on 7th Street was fine for sleeping, but it didn't feel like hers yet. Nothing felt like hers. She was suspended between two lives, the old one dead, the new one not yet born. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. He asked if she was okay without any preamble. She asked him to define okay. He guessed the meeting went that well. She found a bench near a fountain and sat down heavily. She told Marcus the offer was $2 million. That was what 7 years was worth. Marcus said it could be worse. Elena replied it could be better. She watched pigeons fight over a discarded sandwich. She asked Marcus if he knew about Irina. There was silence on the other end. Then Marcus admitted he had suspicions. She asked how long. He sighed and said 4 months, maybe 5. He said he wasn't sure at first, because Victor was always careful about keeping his personal life separate. But he knew something was happening. She thought she should feel betrayed and angry that Marcus hadn't warned her, but she was too tired for anger. She asked what the new girl was like and if it even mattered. Marcus hesitated, then said she was 26 and worked as a bartender at one of the clubs Victor owned. He described her as pretty in an obvious way and said she laughed at everything Victor said. His voice went flat as he added that she didn't really know what Victor was. She just thought he was a successful businessman with an edge. Elena noted that Victor was selling her a fantasy. Marcus agreed. Elena closed her eyes and remembered she was 27 when they met, and she thought she knew what she was getting into. Marcus pointed out that she actually did know, and that was the difference. They were both quiet for a moment. Then Marcus said he shouldn't be calling her because Victor made it clear that employees needed to keep their distance during the divorce. But he told her to call him if she needed anything, and that he didn't care what Victor said. She asked why he was being nice to her. Marcus said it was because she was always decent. She helped him when his sister got sick and needed money for treatment. He added that Victor was making a mistake, but it wouldn't be him who told Victor that, because he liked his kneecaps intact. He cleared his throat and told her she deserved better than this. She thanked Marcus, and he told her to take care of herself. She hung up and sat there until the sun started to set, watching the city move around her. People with jobs and families and normal problems. She envied them so much it physically hurt. When she finally stood to leave, she realized she was only a few blocks from the cafe where she met Adrian. She checked her watch. It was 6:30. He had said mornings, not evenings, so he wouldn't be there. But she went anyway. The cafe was different at night. It had dimmer lighting, jazz playing softly through speakers, and a completely different crowd. There were students typing furiously on laptops, a couple sharing a dessert, and an old man reading a newspaper like the internet didn't exist. She ordered a tea this time and found a seat by the window. She wasn't sure what she was doing there. Hiding, maybe, or hoping for something she couldn't name. Then she heard someone call her name. She looked up and saw Adrian. He stood there in the same leather jacket, holding a camera bag. She greeted him, saying she didn't expect to see him there so late. He asked to sit down, and she happily agreed. He sat and carefully set his camera bag on the floor. Up close, she noticed details she had missed before. He had a thin scar above his left eyebrow, gray threading through his dark hair at the temples, and calloused fingers that suggested years of manual work. She asked how his photo shoot went. He told her it was corporate headshots for 75 people who all hated having their picture taken. He smiled and said he was living the dream. She teased that it sounded terrible, and he agreed but said it paid the bills. He flagged down the barista and ordered a coffee. He asked what she did for a living. It was the question she had been dreading. She told him she was between things right now. He nodded knowingly, mentioning the dreaded transition period. She agreed. He didn't push, which she appreciated more than he could know. Instead, he told her she looked like she had a rough day. She asked if it was obvious. He said she was sitting in the corner of a cafe at 6:30 on a Thursday looking like she was hiding from the world, so it was either a rough day or witness protection. She laughed, actually laughed, and said it was the first option. He asked if she wanted to talk about it. She declined, and he respected that. The barista brought his coffee, and he changed the subject. He asked if she had ever been to the photography exhibit at the Modern Art Museum. She said no. He told her she should go, describing a series on urban decay with abandoned buildings and empty lots. He said it was the parts of the city people pretend don't exist, and that it was beautiful in an awful way. She remarked that it sounded depressing. He agreed, but said it was also honest. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo he had taken. It was an old warehouse with broken windows and weeds growing through cracked concrete. Somehow the light hitting it made it look almost sacred. He told her that sometimes the broken things are the most interesting. Elena stared at the image. She asked him why he was being nice to her when he didn't even know her. Adrian looked genuinely confused. He asked if he needed a reason. He said she seemed like she could use a friendly face, and he had a friendly face, so it was simple math. She noted that people don't usually work that way. He said lightly that maybe she had been around the wrong people. Something in his tone suggested he knew more than he was saying. They talked for 2 hours about photography, books, terrible movies, and travel. It was about nothing important and everything important at the same time. Adrian talked about growing up in a small town in Oregon, his parents who didn't understand his career choice, and a failed engagement 5 years ago that brought him to the city. Elena asked what happened with the engagement. He said they wanted different things. She wanted stability, a house in the suburbs, and kids. He wanted to take pictures of things that made him feel something. He shrugged and said they tried to compromise, but you can't really compromise on fundamental incompatibility. Elena quietly agreed. Then Adrian asked if she had ever been married. The question landed like a punch. Her face must have shown it because Adrian immediately backtracked and apologized. She stopped him and said she was getting divorced. It was the first time she had said it out loud to anyone outside the legal process. She corrected herself, saying she was already divorced in every way that mattered, just waiting for the paperwork. Adrian swore softly and apologized again. She told him not to be sorry, that it was inevitable. He asked how long they were married. When she said 7 years, he winced and said it was a long time. She traced the rim of her teacup. She told him the worst part wasn't that it ended, but that she saw it coming and did nothing. She watched them fall apart in slow motion and convinced herself it was normal. She made excuses for years. She said she chose to ignore it and chose to stay small and quiet and convenient. Adrian's voice was gentle but firm. He suggested that maybe she chose to fight for something she believed in, and the other person gave up first. He said there is a difference between staying and surrendering, and it sounded like she was still fighting. Elena felt something open in her chest, like a door she had kept locked for years finally giving way. She confessed that she didn't know who she was without her ex-husband, and she felt pathetic for not knowing who Elena Volkov was supposed to be at 34 years old. Adrian told her that she now had the chance to figure it out. He said that wasn't pathetic, it was an opportunity. She told him he made it sound easy. He promised it wouldn't be easy and that it would be hard as hell, but hard doesn't mean impossible. He checked his watch and grimaced, saying he had an early shoot the next day and needed to get going. They stood up. Elena felt an unexpected pang of disappointment that the evening was ending. She thanked him for listening. He shouldered his camera bag and told her his offer for a morning coffee buddy still stood with no pressure. She said she might take him up on it, and he said he hoped she would. After he left, she watched him walk down the street. She couldn't remember the last time someone had really listened to her like that. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Victor's lawyer stating that Victor wanted an answer by Monday, and the offer was time-sensitive. She deleted the message without responding. That night, back in the small apartment, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the last 7 years on a loop. It wasn't the big moments like the wedding, the moves, or the anniversaries. It was the small ones. It was the erosion. It was the 1,000 tiny compromises that had worn her down to nothing. She remembered the first time Victor told her to stop coming to meetings. He said it was too dangerous and he needed her safe. She had believed him because she wanted to. It was easier than acknowledging that he was pushing her out. She remembered the dinners where he talked business with his associates and introduced her as his wife, but never asked her opinion. She remembered the vacations he canceled at the last minute. She remembered the nights he came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers, and she said nothing because confronting it meant admitting what was happening. She remembered becoming invisible. The memories hurt, but underneath the hurt was something else. Anger. It was clean, sharp, and clarifying anger. It wasn't at Victor, though there was plenty of that. It was at herself. She was angry for accepting it, for shrinking, and for believing that love meant erasing yourself to make room for someone else. She got out of bed, turned on the lights, and found a notebook in one of her bags. It was something she had bought months ago and never used. She opened it to the first page and started writing. It wasn't a list or a plan, just thoughts, memories. It was everything she had buried for years. She wrote about the girl who met Victor at 27. That girl was full of fire and conviction, and believed they were partners building something meaningful. She wrote about the woman who woke up at 34 and realized she had been playing a supporting role in someone else's story. She wrote about all the versions of herself she had abandoned along the way. And she wrote about what she wanted now. Not revenge, not Victor back, but something harder and more important, herself. When she finally stopped, her hand was cramping and the sun was starting to rise. She looked at what she had written, pages and pages of ugly and honest truth, and felt lighter than she had in years. She showered, dressed, and left the apartment just as the city was waking up. The cafe was quiet when she arrived. There were just a handful of early risers and one familiar face in a leather jacket. Adrian looked up from his laptop and smiled. He noted that she came. She agreed, ordered a coffee, and sat down across from him. She asked if his offer for a coffee buddy was still open. He said absolutely. They didn't talk about anything heavy, just easy conversation over coffee that was too hot and pastries that were too sweet. But sitting there across from Adrian, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like a person, not Victor's wife, not the silent partner, not the woman behind the man, just Elena. And maybe that was enough to start with. The days started to develop a rhythm. She spent mornings at the cafe with Adrian, afternoons walking the city or reading in parks, and evenings alone in the apartment, working through the wreckage of her marriage on paper. Elena met with her own lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who took one look at Victor's offer and called it insulting. Patricia spread documents across her desk and said Elena was with him from the beginning. She told Elena she helped build this empire, even if her name wasn't on the paperwork, and they could fight for more. Elena asked how much more. Patricia said it depended on what she could prove, asking if she contributed financially or strategically. Elena thought about all the late nights, the crisis management, and the times she talked Victor down from decisions that would have gotten him killed. She told Patricia that strategically, yes, but she couldn't prove it because everything was verbal. She explained that Victor made sure of that. Patricia said they would work with what they had. The prenup was valid, but there was room to negotiate, especially if they could demonstrate that her contributions went beyond the typical scope of a spouse. Elena asked how. Patricia smiled, but it wasn't warm. She said they would make him uncomfortable. They would ask questions about business dealings he didn't want examined in court. They would hint at testimony that could expose things he would rather keep buried. They would leverage the fact that a public divorce trial would be very bad for his reputation and his operations. Elena asked if she wanted her to threaten him. Patricia said she wanted her to negotiate from a position of strength, and there was a difference. Elena considered it. Part of her wanted to burn Victor's world down just to watch it collapse. But a larger part, the part that was tired of living in his shadow, just wanted out. She wanted it clean, final, and done. She asked how much they could get. Patricia guessed $5 million, maybe more if he was worried enough. It was more than the original offer. It was still less than she deserved. But maybe Patricia was right. Maybe deserving and getting were two different things. Elena told her to do it. That Friday, she went to the photography exhibit Adrian had mentioned. The Modern Art Museum was hosting it in their basement gallery. There were 3 rooms of black and white images showing the city's forgotten spaces. There were abandoned factories, empty subway stations, and buildings scheduled for demolition. She stood in front of one photo for a long time. It was an old apartment building half demolished, with furniture still visible through the broken walls. It was someone's life exposed to the sky. It should have been depressing, but the way the photographer had captured it made it look almost hopeful. The light in the composition made it look like the destruction was necessary for something new to grow. She heard someone say she saw it, too. Elena turned. Adrian stood next to her with his hands in his pockets, looking at the same image. She told him she didn't know he was coming. He said he wasn't planning to, but he finished his shoot early and thought he would swing by. He nodded toward the photo and said it was his favorite in the whole exhibit. She asked why. He said it was because it was honest. That building was being torn down and there was no saving it. But the photographer didn't try to make it pretty or tragic, just real. Elena stared at the image. The broken walls, the ruined furniture, the sunlight streaming through. She said this is what endings look like, messy and exposed, and somehow still beautiful. She hadn't meant to say it, but the words just came out. She told him she signed divorce papers yesterday. Adrian looked at her and asked how she felt. She told him she didn't know yet, and he should ask her in 6 months. They walked through the rest of the exhibit together, not saying much, just existing in the same space. When they emerged back into the daylight, Adrian checked his phone and groaned. He said he had to run because a client wanted revisions on a project. He hesitated. He told her there was a gallery opening tomorrow night in the Arts District, where a friend of his was showing. He asked if she wanted to go, quickly adding that it would just be his friends with no pressure. He thought it might be good for her to get out. Elena's first instinct was to say no, to hide in her apartment and avoid anything that felt like moving forward. But she thought about the demolished building, about endings that made room for beginnings. She asked what time. Adrian's face lit up and he said 7 o'clock. He told her he would text the address. The gallery opening was exactly what Elena needed. It was crowded and loud and completely removed from the world she left behind. The art was abstract and chaotic. It was the kind of thing Victor would have hated, which made her like it more. Adrian introduced her to his friend Kay. She had purple hair and paint-stained overalls, and talked a mile a minute about color theory and emotional landscapes. Kay complimented Elena's outfit, noting her simple black dress and minimal jewelry. She said it gave off a strong vibe of being over her ex and ready to move on. She respected that. Elena laughed and asked if it was that obvious. Kay said she could smell a fresh divorce from across the room, but promised it gets better, since she had been through 2 herself. Kay grabbed them both champagne from a passing waiter and toasted to new beginnings and burning bridges. They drank. The champagne was terrible and wonderful at the same time. Elena moved through the gallery, half listening to conversations, letting the noise wash over her. At one point, she found herself standing in front of a painting with wild slashes of red and black that somehow resolved into the shape of a bird taking flight. Adrian appeared beside her and asked what she thought. Elena said she thought it was angry and free, both at the same time. She explained that was the hard part. You can't have the freedom without the anger because they are connected. She looked at him and asked if that was from experience. He told her that when his engagement ended, he was furious at his ex, at himself, and at the universe for letting him waste 5 years. But that anger was also what made him leave Portland, start over here, and actually pursue photography instead of treating it like a hobby. He shrugged and agreed, angry and free. You can't have one without the other. Elena thought about Victor, about Irina, and about 7 years of her life that would never come back. The anger was there. It had been there for days, simmering under everything else. But she had been trying to bury it, to be mature and reasonable, and above it all, maybe she needed to let herself be angry. They left the gallery around 10 o'clock and walked through the Arts District. It was alive with people spilling out of bars and restaurants. Adrian knew the neighborhood well, pointing out his favorite spots. There was a bookstore that stayed open until midnight, a taco truck that made the best food in the city, and a rooftop bar where you could see the whole skyline. She asked if he had lived there for 5 years. He said it was long enough to feel like home. He glanced at her and asked if she was from here originally. She said no, she moved here for someone else. She followed them here and just stayed. He asked about now. She said now she was figuring out if she wanted to stay for herself. They ended up at the rooftop bar Adrian had mentioned. It was crowded, but they found a corner spot with a view of the city spreading out in all directions. Elena stood at the railing looking at the lights and felt something strange. She felt small in a good way. Not diminished, but part of something larger. The city didn't care about her divorce or her anger or her confusion. It just kept moving. Adrian asked if he could ask her something. She said sure. He brought up what she said earlier at the exhibit about signing divorce papers. He noted that she didn't sound sad, but sounded relieved. Elena considered lying. making it sound mutual or amicable or any of the polite fictions people tell about failed marriages. But Adrian had been honest with her, so she could return the favor. She told him her ex-husband left her for someone younger on their anniversary. He told her he already made his choice and basically handed her a check to go away quietly. So yes, she was relieved. She was relieved she didn't have to pretend anymore. Adrian swore softly and apologized. She told him not to be sorry because she wasn't. She surprised herself by meaning it. She admitted it hurt terribly at first and still hurt, but staying would have hurt worse. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he shared that his ex told him he wasn't ambitious enough, that he would rather take pictures of garbage than make real money. He admitted she wasn't exactly wrong, because he did take pictures of garbage sometimes. He smiled slightly. He said the problem was the way she said it. Like his choices were a personal insult to her, like he was supposed to be someone else to make her happy. That was what broke them. Not the disagreement, but the contempt. She asked if he felt relieved when it ended. He said eventually. First, he felt like a failure, like he wasted her time and his own. But then he moved to the city and started actually living the life he wanted, instead of the one he thought he was supposed to want. And relief didn't even cover it. They stood there at the railing, their shoulders almost touching. Elena felt something shift. It wasn't just attraction, it was connection. It was the kind that comes from recognizing yourself in someone else's story. She thanked him for treating her like a person. Not a project or a problem or someone who needed fixing, just a person. Adrian smiled and said that was a pretty low bar. She told him he would be surprised. They stayed until the bar closed, talking about everything and nothing. And when Adrian offered to walk her home, Elena said yes. They walked slowly through the quiet streets, their conversation easy and comfortable. When they reached her building on 7th Street, she didn't want the night to end. She pointed out her building, noting it was a studio apartment and very bohemian. He joked that it meant very broke. She smiled and agreed, but said it was hers. He said that counts for something. Adrian hesitated, then said he had a good time tonight and suggested they do it again if she wanted. She said she would like that. He asked if she really meant it. She said yes. He smiled that same genuine smile she noticed the first day in the cafe. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, but he just squeezed her hand briefly and stepped back. He asked if he would see her Monday for coffee. She confirmed she would see him Monday. She watched him walk away, then climbed the 3 flights to her apartment. Inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, her heart beating faster than the stairs justified. For the first time in 7 years, she felt like herself. Not Victor's wife, not the woman she thought she was supposed to be. Just Elena, messy and angry and free, and exactly where she needed to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Chen. It said Victor's lawyer called, and they were willing to negotiate. They were pushing for $5 million plus the savings account. Patricia thought they could get it and said it was Elena's move. Elena stared at the message for a long time. $5 million. It was enough to start over. It was enough to disappear completely from Victor's world. She typed back to take the deal and that she wanted this finished. The response came immediately, asking if she was sure they couldn't push for more. Elena confirmed she was sure and wanted to end it. She set the phone down and looked around the small apartment. She looked at the second-hand furniture, the bare walls, and a life that was completely and utterly hers. $5 million wasn't what she deserved, but it was enough. And maybe enough was all she needed to start over. The settlement went through faster than Elena expected. 2 weeks after she told Patricia to take the deal, she was sitting in another glass conference room signing papers that officially ended her marriage. Victor wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. Richard Moss handled everything with the same cold efficiency he had shown from the beginning. He slid documents across the table and pointed where she needed to initial and sign. Moss said the funds would be transferred within 72 hours. He explained that once she signed the final release, all claims were settled and there would be no further legal action from either party. Elena read through the release carefully. It was dense with legal language, but the message was clear. She was giving up any right to Victor's empire in exchange for the settlement. Everything she helped build, Every strategy she contributed, every crisis she managed, was gone and erased, like she had never existed. She signed it anyway. Patricia walked her out of the building afterward. She asked if Elena was sure she was okay with this, noting it wasn't too late to reconsider. Elena said she was sure. She looked up at the sky, which was gray and heavy with rain that hadn't started falling yet. She said she didn't want anything from him anymore and just wanted to move forward. Patricia agreed that $5 million was a good start for moving forward. She handed Elena a business card and offered help with investment advice or financial planning. Elena thanked her. Patricia told her to take care of herself and added that she thought Elena was making the right choice. Elena watched her lawyer disappear into the midday crowd. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, feeling oddly disconnected from her own body. It was done. Actually, completely done. She was no longer Mrs. Hale, no longer tethered to Victor's world, no longer anything except herself. The feeling should have been liberating. Instead, it just felt empty. Her phone rang. It was Adrian. She answered and asked what was up. He said he knew she had that meeting today and just wanted to check in to see how it went. She appreciated that he didn't ask what the meeting was about. He had figured it out weeks ago, but never pushed for details. She told him it was done, and she was officially divorced as of 20 minutes ago. He asked how she felt. She told him to ask her later. She started walking with no particular direction in mind. She admitted that right now, she just felt numb. He asked if she wanted company, saying he was free that afternoon. She agreed that would be good. They met at a different cafe this time, one near the waterfront with big windows overlooking the harbor. Adrian was already there when she arrived. There were 2 coffees on the table and a pastry he had clearly bought for her. He told her she looked exhausted. She sarcastically thanked him, saying that was exactly what every woman wants to hear. He clarified that she looked like she could use a break from thinking. He pushed the pastry toward her and told her to eat something, asking when she had last eaten. She couldn't remember. She guessed yesterday. He told her to eat. She ate. It was good. It was some kind of almond croissant that flaked everywhere and tasted like butter and comfort. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching boats move across the water, and Elena felt the numbness start to crack around the edges. She asked if she could tell him something weird. He told her to go ahead. She said she thought she would feel different, like fundamentally different. She thought signing those papers would flip some switch and she would suddenly be a new person. She picked at the croissant and admitted she just felt like herself. A sadder herself, maybe. A more tired herself, but still just herself. He told her that wasn't weird. That was normal. She asked if it really was. He said yes, endings don't transform you. They just give you space to figure out who you already are. Adrian took a sip of his coffee. He said when his engagement ended, he kept waiting for a big moment of clarity, a revelation about who he was supposed to become. It never came. He just woke up one day and realized he was already becoming it, slowly, without noticing. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. He was attractive in an understated way. He was the kind of person you might pass on the street without noticing, but who became more compelling the longer you knew him. He had kind eyes, a steady presence, no games, no angles, and no hidden agendas. She suddenly asked him how they met. Adrian blinked and said they met at a cafe when she was reading, and he needed a table. She clarified, asking how they actually met. She pointed out she had been divorced for 20 minutes, and he was already the most stable relationship in her life. She said that was insane. He smiled and asked if it really was. He suggested maybe she just needed someone who wasn't complicated, someone who showed up when they said they would and meant what they said. He noted it was a low bar, but apparently hard to clear. She said he made it sound simple. He insisted it is simple, but people make it complicated. He leaned back in his chair. He told her he wasn't going to pretend he hadn't thought about this, about them. He said he liked her and liked spending time with her, but he also knew she just got out of a 7-year marriage and probably needed space to breathe before jumping into anything new. He promised he wasn't pushing. He was just going to be there for as long as she wanted him to be. Something in Elena's chest loosened. It wasn't opening or breaking, just loosening. It felt like a knot she had been carrying for years was finally starting to untangle. She quietly thanked him. He asked what for. She thanked him for not needing her to be anything except what she was right now, which was kind of a mess. He said everyone is kind of a mess. She was just more honest about it. They stayed at the cafe until the afternoon light started to fade, talking about nothing important. Adrian told her about a wedding he was shooting that weekend, and about the bride, who already called him 6 times with special requests. Elena told him about an apartment she looked at that morning. It was something bigger than the studio, with actual windows and a kitchen that didn't double as a hallway. Adrian asked if she was thinking about staying in the city. She said she didn't know, maybe. There was nothing keeping her there, but nothing calling her away either. She stirred her coffee, even though it was already mixed. She admitted she thought about moving for a fresh start in a new city, but realized she would just be running, and she was tired of running. Adrian asked if she would stay. She said maybe, or maybe she would stay long enough to figure out what she actually wanted, then decide. He said that sounded healthy. She said it sounded terrifying. Adrian grinned and said it was the same thing. When they finally left the cafe, the sun was setting over the water, painting everything orange and pink. They walked along the harbor without any particular destination, and Elena felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. She felt present. She wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. She was just there, right then, walking beside someone who asked nothing of her except her company. Adrian asked if he could show her something. She agreed. He led her away from the waterfront through a neighborhood she didn't recognize, until they reached an old building that looked half abandoned. The sign out front said it used to be a textile factory. Elena asked what it was. He told her it was artist studios. They had converted it a few years ago, and he rented space there for developing prints and working on projects. He unlocked a side door and told her to come inside. The inside of the building was exactly what she expected. It had high ceilings, exposed brick, the smell of paint and chemicals, and creative chaos. Adrian's studio was on the 3rd floor. It was a large open space with work tables, equipment, and photographs covering every available surface. He flipped on the lights and announced this was where the magic happened, or where he wasted hours trying to make mediocre work look decent, depending on the day. Elena walked through the space, looking at the prints hanging to dry, the contact sheets scattered across tables, and the half-finished projects pinned to boards. Most of it was the kind of work she had seen at the exhibit. It was urban decay, forgotten spaces, and the hidden corners of the city. But there was other stuff too. There were portraits of people caught in unguarded moments, street scenes full of life and movement, and a series of close-ups so intimate they felt like secrets. She told him they were beautiful. He humbly said they were fine, and he was working on it. He moved to one of the tables and started organizing prints. He told her he wanted to show her this because of what she said earlier about feeling like she wasn't a new person after the divorce. He explained that change isn't a dramatic transformation. It is small and incremental, like developing a photograph. He held up a print. The image was barely visible and ghostly. He explained this was the first stage, where you can kind of see what it is, but it isn't clear or finished yet. He grabbed another print that was slightly more defined. He said this was further along. The image was coming into focus, but it still wasn't quite there. He showed her a 3rd print, fully developed. He said this was the final version, the exact same image from the beginning, just revealed. It was always there. The process just made it visible. Elena stared at the 3 prints. She asked if he thought she was developing. He told her he thought she was becoming visible to herself. Adrian set the prints down and said the person she was going to be was already there. She was just in the process of revealing her. It was the kind of metaphor that should have felt cheesy or forced. But standing there in his studio, surrounded by images of things becoming clear through patient process, it somehow made perfect sense. She admitted she was scared, asking what would happen if she revealed herself and didn't like what she found. He simply told her she would keep developing. He reminded her she wasn't fixed, and none of us are. We are all just working with what we have and hoping it turns into something good. She wanted to kiss him. The impulse came suddenly and strong. For a moment she almost did, but something held her back. It wasn't fear exactly, but awareness. She wasn't ready. Not because she didn't want him, but because she needed to be whole first, or at least closer to whole. Adrian seemed to sense it. He stepped back and gave her space. He asked if she was hungry, mentioning a great dumpling place around the corner. She said she was starving. They left the studio and found the restaurant. It was a tiny hole in the wall with plastic tables and a menu entirely in Mandarin. Adrian ordered for both of them in broken Chinese that made the owner laugh. They ate dumplings that were too hot and too perfect while arguing about whether the best movie of the last decade was a science fiction epic or a quiet indie drama. By the time Elena got back to her apartment that night, it was past 11 o'clock and she was exhausted in the best possible way. She fell into bed without changing. Her mind was full of Adrian's studio, his photographs, and the way he had looked at her like she was already enough. The next morning, she woke to a text from Patricia. It said the funds had been transferred, told her to check her account, and congratulated her on her fresh start. Elena opened her banking app. The number staring back at her had so many digits it didn't look real. $5,300,000. It was more money than she had ever imagined having in one place. She should feel excited, relieved, or even victorious. Instead, she just felt tired. This was Victor's way of saying goodbye, with money, because that was the only language he really understood. It was her consolation prize for 7 wasted years. It was what her loyalty was worth. She was supposed to take it and disappear. She thought about sending him a message, something cutting that would make him understand what he had thrown away. But what was the point? Victor didn't care. If he did, none of this would have happened. Instead, she texted Adrian and asked about coffee this morning. His response came immediately, saying always, and that he would see her in 20 minutes. The cafe was becoming their place. Elena was starting to recognize the regulars. There was the old man who always sat by the window with his newspaper, the college student who camped out with textbooks for hours, and the barista with pink hair whose name was apparently Sam. Adrian was already there when she arrived. He took one look at her face and stated that the money came through. It wasn't a question. She asked how he knew. He said she looked like someone who just got handed a fortune they didn't want. He slid a coffee across the table and told her to talk to him. So she did. She told him about the settlement. She told him about seeing the number in her account and feeling nothing except hollow. She talked about how Victor had reduced 7 years to a transaction, and how much it hurt even though she had known it was coming. She said Victor thought he was being generous, as if $5 million was supposed to make up for everything. Adrian asked if it did. She said no. Then she said yes. Then she admitted she didn't know. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, seeking warmth. She explained that the money wasn't the problem, and she was glad to have it. But it was what it represented. It meant that everything they built together could just be divided up and distributed like assets. It felt like she was an employee getting severance, not a partner. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he asked what would make it better, and what would actually feel like closure. Elena considered the question. She realized nothing would. That was the problem. There was nothing Victor could do or say that would make this okay, so she needed to let it go. She needed to stop waiting for him to acknowledge what they had and just accept that he had moved on. Adrian gently asked if she had moved on. She said she was trying to. He said that wasn't what he asked. She met his eyes and admitted she hadn't. Part of her was still there, still in that penthouse, still married to a man who didn't exist anymore, or maybe never existed. She was working on it, but wasn't there yet. He said that was fair and honest. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. He told her to take her time and that there was no timeline for this. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back. She told him he was too patient with her. He said he was exactly as patient as he wanted to be. They finished their coffee and walked aimlessly through the city, the way they had started doing most mornings. It was becoming a routine. Coffee, conversation, wandering. Sometimes they talked about deep things, sometimes about nothing at all. Sometimes they didn't talk, just walked in comfortable silence. Today they ended up near the waterfront again. The harbor was busy with morning traffic, ferries and cargo ships, and tourist boats. Elena watched a sailboat cut through the water, its white sail bright against the gray sky. She suddenly mentioned that she used to sail. Before Victor, she had a little boat she took out on weekends. It was nothing fancy, just enough to get away from shore for a while. Adrian asked what happened to it. She explained she sold it when they got married because Victor got seasick. She thought she was being practical since they needed the money for other things, and it seemed stupid to keep something she would never use. She smiled sadly and said she missed it sometimes. She missed the quiet and the way everything on land seemed small and manageable when she was out on the water. Adrian told her she could get another boat. She laughed and asked if she should buy one with her $5 million, adding that it seemed ridiculous. He asked why it was ridiculous. He pointed out she had the money and loved sailing, so there was no reason not to. She said it was because she didn't know if she even remembered how, after 7 years. He suggested she learn again, take lessons, and start small. He looked at her and said she could also just buy a boat and figure it out as she went. He asked what was the worst that could happen. She dryly noted she could drown. He countered that she could also remember something she loved and get it back. Elena thought about it. She actually thought about buying a boat, learning to sail again, and spending weekends on the water like she used to. It seemed impossible and perfect at the same time. She said maybe, and that it was a start. They were walking past a coffee cart when Elena saw him, Victor. He was just across the street coming out of a restaurant with a woman on his arm. She was young, blonde, and laughing at something he had said. Irina. Elena stopped so abruptly that Adrian almost walked into her. He asked what was wrong. She couldn't speak and couldn't move. She just stood there staring at the man who had been her entire world for 7 years. She watched him live his new life like their marriage had never happened. Victor looked happy and relaxed. It was the kind of happy she hadn't seen in years, maybe ever. His hand rested on Irina's lower back, possessive and comfortable. She leaned into him, saying something that made him really smile. It wasn't the cold expression Elena had become used to. Adrian's voice seemed to come from very far away. He asked who that was. She said it was her ex-husband. She watched Victor hail a cab. She watched him open the door for Irina the way he used to do for Elena in the beginning. She watched them drive away, probably back to the penthouse and back to the life that used to be hers. Adrian asked if she was okay. She said she didn't know, and her voice sounded strange. She said she thought she would be okay, and she thought seeing him wouldn't matter anymore. Adrian asked if it did matter. She admitted it did. She finally tore her eyes away from the spot where the cab had disappeared. She clarified it wasn't because she wanted him back, but because he looked happy. And she felt it wasn't fair that he got to be happy when he destroyed everything. Adrian didn't try to convince her otherwise. He didn't tell her Victor probably wasn't as happy as he looked, or that karma would catch up with him eventually. He just stood beside her, solid and present. Finally, he suggested they get out of there. She agreed and said they should go anywhere that wasn't there. They ended up at the Modern Art Museum, the same place where they had looked at photographs of broken buildings. Elena sat on a bench in front of an abstract painting. It was chaotic but somehow resolved into something beautiful when you stepped back far enough. She tried to breathe through the anger and hurt churning in her chest. Adrian asked her to talk to him. She said she didn't know what to say. She admitted she was just so angry. She was angry at Victor for moving on so easily, at herself for caring, and at the universe for letting him be happy, while she was still trying to remember how to be a person. She pressed her palms against her eyes. She confessed she knew she was supposed to be bigger than this, more mature, but she wanted him to hurt the way she hurt. She wanted him to realize what he lost, and she hated that she wanted that. Adrian firmly told her that didn't make her immature. It made her human. She argued it made her pathetic. Adrian disagreed. He said it made her someone who loved deeply and got hurt. He assured her she was allowed to be angry and allowed to want him to understand what he threw away. He told her those were normal feelings and not to beat herself up for having them. She lowered her hands and asked when it would stop and when she would stop caring. He said he didn't know, but she would. One day she would see him and feel nothing, or she would feel pity, or she would just feel grateful it ended. He paused and noted she wasn't there yet, and that was okay. She didn't have to be. They sat in silence for a while. Then Elena noted that Irina looked happy too, like she had no idea what she had gotten into. Adrian said maybe she didn't. Elena wondered if she should warn her. Adrian asked if Elena would have listened if someone warned her 7 years ago. Elena thought about the girl she had been at 27, confident, in love, and certain she could handle anything Victor's world threw at her. She admitted she wouldn't have listened. Adrian told her to save her energy. He said Irina would figure it out, or she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't Elena's problem anymore. He was right. Intellectually, Elena knew he was right. But emotionally, she was still standing on that street corner, watching Victor walk away with someone new. She felt like she had been erased from his life so completely. It was like she had never existed at all. She quietly said she should be over this by now. It had been weeks. She signed the papers, and she took the money. She felt she should be done. Adrian reminded her that healing isn't linear. Some days she would feel fine, and some days she would feel like this. That was how it worked. Adrian stood and offered her his hand. He told her to come on, because he wanted to show her something. She let him pull her to her feet and followed him through the museum to a different gallery. This one was full of sculptures with abstract forms in marble, bronze, and steel. Adrian stopped in front of a massive piece that looked like twisted metal. He asked her to look at it, noting that she just saw chaos, right? Just metal bent into random shapes. She agreed. He told her to walk around it. She circled the sculpture slowly. From different angles, the chaos started to resolve into patterns, intentional curves, and deliberate balance. What had looked random from the front was actually carefully constructed from every other angle. Adrian explained it was all about perspective. Where you stand determines what you see. He told her that right now, she was standing in the worst possible spot. She was right in the middle of the pain, looking at Victor being happy while she was struggling. But he pointed out that wasn't the whole picture. That was just the angle she was seeing from right now. She asked what the better angle was. He said there wasn't one better angle, just different angles. Eventually, if she kept moving, she would find a spot where this all made sense, where she could see the whole shape of her life and understand why this had to happen. He looked at her and said she had to keep moving. She couldn't stay stuck in this one position. Elena stared at the sculpture, walking around it again, watching it change with every step. She told him he should have been a therapist. He laughed and said he just took pictures of broken things and pretended that made him wise. He smiled and suggested they go do something that had nothing to do with her ex. She asked like what? He said he didn't know, just something fun. He asked when the last time was that she did something just because it sounded fun. She couldn't remember. They ended up at a batting cage in an entertainment complex across town. Elena hadn't held a baseball bat since high school, and her first few swings missed completely. But Adrian was patient. He adjusted her stance and showed her how to watch the ball. Eventually, she started making contact. The solid sound of the bat meeting the ball was satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. Adrian called from the next cage over that she was getting it. She swung and connected solidly, sending the ball flying back into the netting. She admitted this was actually kind of great. He proudly said he told her so. They stayed until her arms were sore, and she was laughing too hard to swing properly. Walking back to the car, Elena felt lighter than she had in weeks. She wasn't healed. She wasn't naive enough to think an afternoon at the batting cages had fixed anything, but she felt lighter. It felt like maybe Adrian was right about perspective. As they drove back through the city, she thanked him. He asked for what? She thanked him for today, for not letting her spiral, and for just being himself. Adrian glanced at her and smiled. He told her she was welcome, but she did the work. He just showed up. When he dropped her at her apartment, Elena lingered in the car for a moment. She asked if she could ask him something. He said always. She asked why he was doing this. Why was he being her friend, putting up with her mess, and spending his free time making sure she didn't fall apart? She wanted to know what he got out of it. Adrian turned to face her fully. He honestly said he liked her. He liked who she was when she wasn't trying to be someone else. He liked that she was real and messy and not afraid to admit she was struggling. He paused, then said maybe he saw something in her that she didn't see in herself yet, and he wanted to be around when she finally saw it too. Elena's breath caught. He asked if that was too much. He admitted he had a habit of saying exactly what he was thinking. He grimaced and mentioned that Katie used to hate that about him, saying he was too intense. Elena asked if that was his ex. He confirmed it was Katie, the one who thought he wasn't ambitious enough. Elena said with absolute certainty that she was wrong about the ambition thing. She told him he was plenty ambitious, just ambitious about different things. He softly thanked her. He told her to get some rest and asked if he would see her Monday. She confirmed Monday. She climbed out of the car and watched him drive away. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. Inside the apartment, she made tea and sat by the window watching the city move below. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. It said he saw Victor today with the new girl and thought she should know Victor asked about her. Elena stared at the message. Then she typed back, asking what he said. Marcus replied that Victor asked if he had heard from her and if she was doing okay. Elena asked what Marcus told him. He said he told Victor she was better than okay and that she was doing great. Elena smiled and thanked Marcus. He replied anytime, and then asked if she really was doing better. She thought about it. She thought about the morning coffee with Adrian, the batting cages, the sculpture in the museum, and the way her life was slowly starting to take shape around something other than Victor. She typed back that yes, she really was. She set the phone down and looked out at the city. The lights were coming on as darkness fell, and life was happening everywhere around her. Victor was out there somewhere living his new life with Irina. And she was here, living hers with Adrian, pure possibility, and $5 million she didn't know what to do with yet. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even good most days, but it was hers. And maybe that was enough. 3 weeks passed before Elena saw Victor again. It was 3 weeks of morning coffee with Adrian, of slowly transforming the studio apartment into something that felt like home, and of learning to exist in a world that didn't revolve around Victor Hale's empire. She had started looking at sailboats online. She wasn't serious, just browsing and remembering what it felt like to want something for herself. She was at the grocery store when it happened. It was a mundane Tuesday afternoon, and she was trying to decide between 2 types of pasta sauce when she heard his voice behind her. He said her name. She turned. Victor stood 3 feet away, alone, wearing jeans and a plain black sweater. They were casual clothes she almost forgot he owned. He looked different than he had outside the restaurant with Irina. He looked tired and uncertain. She said his name. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He said hi, noting he didn't expect to see her there. She vaguely gestured and explained she lived in the neighborhood now. He called it a small world. An awkward silence stretched between them. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a child was crying about cereal. Victor finally said she looked good. She thanked him. He said she looked different, maybe lighter. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just stood there holding a jar of marinara sauce like it was a shield. Victor asked if they could talk, just for a few minutes. He pointed out a coffee shop across the street. Every instinct told her to say no, to walk away, finish her shopping, and go back to the life she was building without him. But there was something in his expression, something almost vulnerable, that made her pause. She agreed, but only gave him 10 minutes. The coffee shop was generic and crowded. They found a corner table, ordered drinks neither of them wanted, and sat across from each other like strangers. Victor asked how she had been. She said she was adjusting, and asked about him. He said he was good and busy. He stirred his coffee absently. He mentioned he heard she took the settlement. She confirmed she did. He said that was good, and he wanted to make sure she was taken care of. Elena almost laughed. Taken care of. She told him that was one way to put it. He said her name again. She directly asked what he wanted, telling him to talk since he asked to meet. Victor looked at her for a long moment. He said he had been thinking about them and about how things ended. She corrected him, saying he meant how he ended things. He agreed. He set his spoon down and said he wanted her to know it wasn't easy making that decision. The anger came quickly, hot and sharp. She asked if he wanted credit for finding it difficult to blow up their marriage. She explicitly told him she wasn't giving him credit for that. He said he wasn't asking for credit, he was trying to explain. She firmly stated there was nothing to explain. She told him he fell for someone younger, wanted out, and got out, which was the end of the story. He insisted it wasn't that simple. She leaned forward and told him it was exactly that simple. She said he didn't get to make this complicated now. He didn't get to show up at her grocery store and tell her it was hard for him. He made his choice and had to live with it. Victor's jaw tightened. He said he was trying to do the right thing here. She countered that the right thing was staying married to her, or at least having the decency to work on their problems before jumping into bed with someone else. She gestured between them and said this was not the right thing. She told him this was just him trying to feel better about himself. He said that wasn't fair. She reminded him that nothing about this was fair. Elena stood up. She told him she was done here and told him to enjoy his coffee. He asked her to wait. He reached across the table like he might grab her hand, then thought better of it. He pleaded for just 5 more minutes. She asked why she should. He said because he owed her a real explanation. Elena sat back down slowly and told him he had 5 minutes. Victor took a breath. For the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. He confessed that things with Irina were not what he thought they would be. Elena cut him off, saying she didn't want to hear about his relationship problems. He begged her to just listen. He ran a hand through his hair and said it had been 3 months and it was already falling apart. She replied they had nothing to talk about. He pushed on, saying Irina didn't understand his work and didn't want to understand it. She wanted the lifestyle, the money, and the excitement, but none of the reality. He started to say he kept thinking, but Elena's voice went cold, and she warned him not to dare finish that sentence. He ignored her and said he kept thinking he made a mistake. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Elena stared at him, waiting for the rush of vindication or satisfaction, but all she felt was tired. She quietly agreed that he did make a mistake, but not the one he thought. Victor frowned and asked what she meant. She told him his mistake wasn't leaving her for Irina. His mistake was thinking he could replace what they had with someone new. She explained that he got bored and comfortable. Instead of doing the work to fix what was broken, he decided to start over with someone who didn't know him well enough to call him out. She leaned back and told him the truth. He was still the same person, with the same patterns and the same problems. She warned him that eventually Irina would know him as well as she did, and he would be right back where he started. He tried to deny it, but she insisted he knew it was true. Her voice softened slightly. She told him she wasn't saying this to be cruel, but because it was true. The problem was never her or Irina. The problem was he hadn't figured out what he actually wanted. Victor looked down at his untouched coffee. He asked what if what he wanted was her. The question should have meant something. 6 weeks ago, it would have meant everything. But sitting there now, looking at the man she had built a life with, Elena felt nothing except a distant kind of pity. She told him he didn't want her. He wanted the idea of her. He wanted the version that existed 7 years ago, before he spent years pushing her away. She clearly stated that person didn't exist anymore. She wasn't her, and she didn't want to be. He argued that people can change. She challenged him, asking if he had changed at all in the last 3 months, or if he just swapped out one woman for another and assumed that would fix everything. He didn't answer. She said that was what she thought. Elena stood again. She genuinely told him she hoped it worked out with Irina. But even if it didn't, they were not going back to what they were. That door was closed. He called her name. She said her 5 minutes were up and told him to take care of himself. She walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. Her hands were shaking and her heart was racing, but underneath the adrenaline was something else: clarity. Victor had given her the closure she thought she needed, and it turned out she didn't need it at all. She had already moved on. He was the one still stuck. Her phone buzzed as she reached her car. It was Adrian. He texted to ask if they were still on for dinner tonight, mentioning a place that does Thai fusion, and joking he was morally obligated to take her there. Elena smiled. She typed back absolutely and told him to pick her up at 7 o'clock. He replied that it was a date. She sent an acknowledging sound. He quickly corrected himself, saying it was a date between friends, and she knew what he meant. She did know what he meant, and maybe that was part of the problem. She was starting to wish it was an actual date. She was starting to notice the way Adrian's eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way he listened like every word she said mattered, and the way he made her feel seen in a way Victor never had. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. Soon, maybe, but not yet. She drove back to her apartment and called Marcus. When he answered, she told him Victor showed up at her grocery store. Marcus swore and asked what he wanted. She said he wanted to tell her things weren't working out with Elena and that he made a mistake. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then asked what she said. She told him she told Victor to figure his life out and leave her alone. Elena unlocked her apartment door. She asked how bad it was with Elena. Marcus said it was bad enough that he was questioning things. Elena didn't fit into his world the way she thought she would. There was too much reality and not enough romance. He paused and told her confidentially that he gave it another month before it imploded completely. Elena asked what happens then. She asked if he comes crawling back to her. Marcus said probably. She firmly stated that wasn't happening. Marcus said he knew, but Victor didn't know that yet. Marcus's voice turned serious. He told Elena he was telling her this as a friend. Victor wasn't thinking clearly right now. He was realizing what he lost and he was going to try to get it back. He told her to be prepared for that. She said she was prepared and had told him they were done. Marcus warned her that telling him and convincing him are two different things. Victor was used to getting what he wanted, and when he decided he wanted her back, he was going to push hard. Elena thought about Victor's face in the coffee shop, that mix of regret and entitlement. She told Marcus to let him push, because she wasn't budging. Marcus said good, but told her to be careful. He added that if Victor showed up again, she should call him so he could run interference. She thanked Marcus. He said anytime. She hung up and looked around her apartment. It was small and imperfect and entirely hers. The furniture was secondhand. The view was a brick wall, and the kitchen barely had room for one person. But it was the first space she had in 7 years that Victor hadn't touched, influenced, or controlled. She wasn't giving that up for anything. That night, Adrian took her to the Thai fusion restaurant. It was a tiny place in Chinatown with mismatched chairs and the best soup she had ever tasted. They sat at a corner table sharing dishes and arguing about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Adrian firmly stated it was a crime against nature. Elena insisted it was delicious and he was wrong. He swore he would die on this hill. She told him that was a stupid hill to die on. He grinned and said all the best hills are stupid, which is what makes them worth dying for. Elena laughed, really laughed. It was the kind of laugh that made her stomach hurt. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she felt this light, this present, and this alive. She asked if she could tell him something. He said always. She told him she saw Victor today at the grocery store. Adrian's expression shifted slightly. He asked how that was. She said it was weird. He wanted to talk, so they got coffee. He told her things weren't working out with Elena and that he made a mistake leaving her. She took a sip of her wine. She told Adrian that she told Victor they were done and that what they had didn't exist anymore. Adrian asked how he took it. She said badly, but admitted she didn't really care how he took it. Elena met Adrian's eyes. She told him she meant what she said and that she was done with that part of her life. Adrian said good. She hesitated, trying to find the right words. She told him she thought she was starting to be okay. Actually okay, not just pretending. And she told him a lot of that was because of him. Adrian looked uncomfortable. He tried to interrupt, telling her she was going through a divorce. Emotions were complicated right now, and she might be confusing gratitude with something else. Elena gently but firmly told him to stop. She told him not to tell her what she was feeling. She said she knew the difference between gratitude and this, because she had experienced both, and they didn't feel the same. Adrian asked what if she was wrong. What if she woke up in 6 months and realized she just needed a friend, not whatever this was? She said then she would deal with it in 6 months. But right now, she knew what she felt, and she was tired of being afraid to say it. She reached across the table and took his hand. She told him she liked him, really liked him, and if he felt the same way, she wanted to see where this could go. Adrian looked down at their joined hands. He admitted he was terrified of screwing this up. She said she was too. He pointed out she just got divorced and the ink was barely dry on the papers. She acknowledged that. He said this could be a disaster. She agreed it could be. Elena smiled slightly and added that it could also be exactly what they both needed. Adrian was quiet for a long, long moment. Then he squeezed her hand. He confessed he had liked her since the first day in the cafe. When she sat down with her book and looked like she was trying to disappear into it, he thought she was beautiful and sad and completely out of his league. She corrected him, saying she wasn't out of his league. He insisted she kind of was, but he was choosing to ignore that. He smiled his genuine smile. He admitted this was probably a terrible idea. She agreed it probably was. He suggested they take it slow. She agreed they should. No pressure, no expectations, just see what happens. He agreed. They sat there holding hands across the table while the rain pattered against the windows. Elena felt something settle in her chest. It wasn't certainty. She had learned that certainty was an illusion. It was possibility. It was the kind that came from choosing something for yourself instead of letting yourself be chosen. Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and grimaced. He told her he had a client meeting in an hour and asked if they could continue the conversation later. She said definitely, suggesting dinner at her place, since she made a pretty decent pasta. He said he would like that. He stood up, then hesitated. He told her that for what it was worth, he thought she was brave, braver than she gave herself credit for. She admitted she didn't feel brave. He noted the brave ones never do. He leaned down and kissed her forehead softly. He asked to see her at 7 o'clock tonight. She agreed to 7 o'clock. She watched him leave, then sat alone with her coffee, feeling lighter than she had in months, maybe years. The future was uncertain and probably messy and definitely complicated, but for the first time it felt like hers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. It said Victor had been asking about her again, wanting to know if Marcus knew where she was living now. He said he didn't tell Victor anything, but thought she should know. Elena stared at the message, then typed back. She thanked him for the heads up and said if Victor asked again, to tell him she was fine and to leave her alone. Marcus agreed. He asked if she really was okay. She confirmed she was, actually okay this time. He said good, and that she deserved that. She finished her coffee and left the cafe, walking through the rain without an umbrella. The water soaked through her jacket and plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't care. She felt alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. She was messy and uncertain and completely, utterly herself. The day passed in a blur of small tasks. She went to the bank and signed papers to move most of the settlement money into investments Patricia had recommended. She looked at apartments, real ones with actual bedrooms and kitchens that weren't afterthoughts. She even stopped by a marina and picked up brochures about sailing lessons. By the time evening came, she was nervous in the best possible way. Adrian's apartment was in an old building in the Arts District. It was a third-floor walk-up, with hardwood floors and walls covered in photographs. They were his photographs, Elena realized. Not the ones hanging in galleries, but personal ones. Moments he had captured just for himself. He apologized for the mess, moving a stack of photography magazines off the couch. He said he wasn't expecting company until about 3 hours ago. She told him it was perfect, and it was. It was lived in and real, and nothing like the sterile perfection of the penthouse she had shared with Victor. They cooked together, or rather Adrian cooked while Elena chopped vegetables and tried not to get in the way. They drank wine that was cheap and too sweet, and talked about everything except the conversation from that morning. Music played softly from a speaker, something jazzy and complicated that Adrian said he couldn't work without. She asked if she could ask him something as they settled at his small dining table with plates of pasta. He said always. She asked why he chose photography. Adrian twirled pasta on his fork, considering. He said honestly, He liked capturing moments that would otherwise disappear. Most of life just happens and then it is gone. Photography let him hold on to pieces of it. The good parts, the ugly parts, all of it, like evidence that it existed. She noted that was exactly like that. He took a bite and chewed thoughtfully. He asked what she wanted to be before everything happened. Elena smiled at the memory. She told him she wanted to be a lawyer, specifically a prosecutor. She wanted to put bad people away and make the world safer. She admitted it was very idealistic. He asked what happened. She said she met Victor and fell in love with someone who operated on the other side of the law. She convinced herself she could change him, or that love was more important than her principles. She shrugged and said she was 27 and stupid. Adrian gently told her she wasn't stupid, she was hopeful, and there is a difference. She questioned if there really was a difference. She set down her fork. She said she gave up everything she wanted to be part of his world. And for what? So he could trade her in when he got bored. Adrian gently pointed out that she got something out of it too. It might not be what she thought she was getting, but she got experience, perspective, and the knowledge of what she didn't want. She noted that was an expensive lesson. He replied all the important ones are. They finished dinner and moved to the couch with more wine. Elena curled into the corner with her feet tucked under her and felt more at ease than she had in any of the expensive restaurants Victor used to take her to. Adrian asked if he could show her something. She agreed. He disappeared into what must have been his bedroom and came back with a photo album. They were actual physical prints, not digital files. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and opened it. He explained these were photos from his engagement, the good parts before everything fell apart. Elena looked at the pictures. They showed Adrian and a pretty blonde woman, presumably Katie. They were laughing at a beach, sharing ice cream, and dancing at what looked like a wedding. They looked happy, young, hopeful, and convinced their future was certain. Elena asked why he was showing her this. He said he wanted her to understand something. That relationship ended badly. She said things that hurt, he said things that hurt, and they made each other miserable for the last year they were together. But he said that didn't erase the fact that they were happy once. They loved each other, even if it didn't last. He turned to a photo of them at sunset, Katie's head on his shoulder, both of them smiling. He told Elena the point was that just because something ends doesn't mean it was a mistake. He said maybe her and Victor was exactly what she needed at 27. Maybe she needed to build an empire, learn what she was capable of, and discover her own strength. Maybe Victor needed her to help him become the person he is now, even if that person is kind of an idiot. Elena laughed despite herself. Adrian continued, saying the ending doesn't negate the beginning. It just means they grew past each other, and that was okay. It was sad, but it was okay. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the understanding, and the complete lack of judgment. She asked how he was so wise about relationships when his didn't work out either. He told her failed relationships teach you more than successful ones. Success is easy to understand, but failure makes you dig deep. Elena set the album aside and shifted closer. She thanked him for understanding that it was complicated. He said everything worth having is complicated. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the rain still falling outside and the music still playing softly. Then Elena admitted she was scared. He asked of what? She said of this, of him. She was scared of the fact that she was sitting there feeling things she swore she wouldn't feel again for a very long time. She met his eyes and said she was scared she was going to mess this up, or that he would realize she was too broken to be worth the effort. He told her she wasn't broken, she was healing, and there is a difference. Adrian reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He said for what it was worth, he was scared too. He was scared she would wake up one day and realize she could do better, that this was just a rebound, and that he was the safe choice after the exciting one. She told him he wasn't a rebound. He asked how she knew. She said because rebounds don't make you want to be better, they make you want to hide. She put her hand over his where it still rested near her face. She told him he made her want to try, to be honest, to actually show up as herself instead of whoever she thought he wanted her to be. Adrian leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met softly and tentatively. It was a question more than a statement. Elena felt her heart kick against her ribs. She felt years of careful control start to crack open. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. He asked if they were really doing this. She said she thought they were. He asked if there was no going back to just friends. She replied she didn't think they were ever just friends. He smiled and agreed. They kissed again, longer this time. Elena felt something shift inside her. It wasn't breaking, but opening, like a door that had been locked for years, finally giving way. This was different from what she had with Victor. It was gentler, more equal, and built on honesty instead of intensity. It was terrifying and perfect and completely unpredictable. They stayed on the couch until midnight, talking and kissing, and slowly figuring out how this worked. They were learning how to be two people who had both been hurt, trying to build something new. There were no guarantees and no promises of forever. They were just two people choosing each other in this moment and seeing where it led. When Elena finally left, Adrian walked her to her car in the rain. He kissed her goodnight like he was afraid she might disappear, and made her promise to text when she got home. She said she would. He called her name. She stopped. He told her that he could feel this was going to be good. She asked how he could be sure. He admitted he couldn't, but he was choosing to believe it anyway. She drove home with that thought warming her from the inside out, choosing to believe. That was the difference, wasn't it? With Victor, she had believed because she was afraid not to. With Adrian, she believed because she wanted to. The next few weeks unfolded slowly and carefully. Elena and Adrian fell into a rhythm of mornings at the cafe, occasional dinners, and long walks through the city where they talked about everything and nothing. They took it slow, mindful of the fact that Elena was still healing and that rushing would only create cracks. But slow didn't mean stagnant. Elena enrolled in sailing lessons at the marina, remembering how to trim sails and read the wind. She found a new apartment, bigger than the studio, with windows that actually let in light. She started thinking about what she wanted to do with her life, now that Victor's empire was no longer her concern. And through it all, Adrian was there. He wasn't overwhelming or demanding, just present. He photographed her learning to sail and captured her laughing at dinner. He created a visual record of her becoming someone new. She teased him one afternoon that he was obsessed as he aimed his camera at her for the 100th time. He told her she was a good subject because she didn't pose, she just existed, and that was rare. She said she wasn't doing anything interesting. He said she was living, and that is the most interesting thing there is. 3 months after their first kiss, Elena got a call from Marcus. He asked if she was sitting down. She asked if she should be. He told her Victor and Irina broke up. It was messy in public, with lots of yelling in expensive restaurants. He said it was all over the underground gossip mill. Elena waited for the satisfaction or the vindication. It didn't come. She just felt a distant kind of pity. She asked how Victor was doing. Marcus said not great. He was drinking too much and making bad decisions. He mentioned Victor had been asking about her again. She told Marcus to tell Victor she was happy and had moved on. She paused, looking around her new apartment with its second-hand furniture and the photographs Adrian had given her. She told Marcus to tell him she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Marcus agreed and asked if she really was happy. She confirmed she really was. Victor showed up at her apartment 2 days later. Elena saw him from her window. He was standing on the sidewalk looking up at her building, like he wasn't sure he should be there. She could have ignored him or pretended she wasn't home. But there was something in his posture, something defeated, that made her go downstairs. She called his name. He turned. He looked terrible. He looked exhausted and older, like the last few months had aged him years. He said he wasn't sure she would come down. She admitted she almost didn't. She stayed on the building's front steps, keeping distance between them. She asked what he wanted. He mentioned he heard she moved and got a new place. She confirmed she did. He said it was nice and the neighborhood seemed good. She agreed it was. Elena crossed her arms and told him he didn't come there to talk about her apartment. Victor looked down at his hands. He told her he and Irina broke up. She said she heard and told him he was right about everything. It was the same pattern and the same problems, just a different person. He laughed bitterly. He said he thought he could start over and be someone new, but it turned out he was just who he was. She told him people can change, Victor. They just have to really want to, not just say the words. He insisted he wanted to. He looked at her finally, and his eyes were red and tired. He said he wanted to be better and be the person she thought he was when they met. She bluntly told him that person never existed. He was always this person. She just didn't want to see it. He stepped closer. Elena stepped back. He asked if he could ask her something. She told him to ask. He asked if she was seeing someone. She could lie and make this easier for both of them, but she had promised herself honesty, even when it hurt. She said yes. Something crumpled in Victor's expression. He asked if it was serious. She said it could be, but she didn't know yet. But she told him she was happy, happier than she was with him, even in the good times. She explained it wasn't because of the new guy specifically. It was because she was finally being herself. Victor said he could give her that space now to be herself because he had learned his lesson. She firmly said no. She told him he had 7 years to give her that space and chose not to. She was done waiting for him to figure out what he should have known from the beginning. Relationships are about partnership, not ownership. Victor's jaw tightened. He asked if that was it, if they were done forever. She reminded him they had been done for months. He was just catching up. He said he still loved her. She replied that maybe he did, but love without respect is just noise, and he never respected her. Not as an equal and not as a partner. She said she was useful and convenient, but she was never his priority. Elena felt years of frustration finally finding words. She told him the saddest part was that she could have forgiven the cheating and the divorce. But she couldn't forgive the fact that he never really saw her. She was always just a reflection of what he needed in that moment. He insisted that wasn't true. She told him it was true, and deep down, he knew it. She softened slightly. She genuinely told him she hoped he figured out what he actually wanted. She hoped he found someone who fit into his life without disappearing. But she made it clear that person wasn't her, and it never was. She turned to go back inside. Victor called after her. He asked if the new guy was good to her. Elena looked back. She said he sees the real her, not the version he wishes she was. And yes, he was good to her. Victor's voice cracked. He said he was glad she was happy, even if he wasn't the one making her happy. She told him to take care of himself. She went inside and didn't look back. Up in her apartment, she watched from the window as Victor stood on the sidewalk for a long time before finally getting into his car and driving away. She waited for the sadness, the regret, or the what-ifs. But all she felt was relief. That chapter was closed, really and truly closed. Her phone rang. It was Adrian. She answered and told him he had impeccable timing. He asked if it was good or bad timing. She said it was definitely good and moved away from the window. She asked what he was doing tonight. He said whatever she wanted to do. She told him to come over, offering to cook so they could just exist together. He said that sounded perfect. They hung up and Elena started preparing dinner, humming along to the music she put on. Her apartment was small and imperfect and absolutely nothing like the penthouse, but it was hers. The furniture was hers, the choices were hers, and the life being built there was entirely hers. Adrian showed up an hour later with wine and flowers. They were daisies, simple and unpretentious, so different from the elaborate arrangements Victor used to send. They ate pasta at her tiny table, with their knees bumping underneath. They talked about Adrian's latest photography project. He said he was thinking about doing a series on transformation, featuring people who reinvented themselves, started over, and became who they were always meant to be. She said it sounded interesting, and asked who he was photographing. He said he was hoping she would be his first subject. Elena blinked in surprise. He explained she was the perfect example because she went from living in someone else's shadow to standing in her own light, and that was the story he wanted to tell. She wasn't sure she was that interesting. He said she was to him. Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. He told her she was the most interesting person he had ever met, and he wanted to document who she was becoming if she was comfortable with it. She thought about it. She thought about letting someone chronicle her transformation, her healing, and her becoming. It should feel vulnerable and exposing, but instead it felt right. She agreed to do it. They spent the evening talking through his vision for the project, and Elena found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She talked about her childhood, the dreams she abandoned, and the person she wanted to be now that she had the freedom to choose. She finally admitted she wanted to matter, not as someone's wife or partner, but as herself. She wanted to do something that made a difference. He asked, like what? She said she didn't know yet. Maybe she would go back to school, start a nonprofit, or just figure out what she was good at and build from there. She smiled and added that she had the money to do basically anything, which was both liberating and terrifying. Adrian advised her to start small, try things, and see what sticks. He squeezed her hand and reminded her she didn't have to figure it all out at once. She told him that was very wise. He joked that he had his moments. They moved to the couch with Elena's head on Adrian's shoulder and his arm around her waist. It felt easy and natural, like they had been doing this for years instead of months. She asked to tell him something. He said always. She told him she was falling in love with him. She clarified it was actually in love, not just liking him or being grateful, but the real thing. She felt him tense slightly. She quickly added he didn't have to say it back, she just wanted him to know. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he confessed he had been in love with her since she told him about throwing the wine glass at the window. He explained that the way she described that act of perfect honest rage made him realize she was someone who felt things fully. She was someone brave enough to break instead of pretending everything was fine. Elena lifted her head to look at him. She asked if he had been in love with her for months and didn't say anything. He explained she needed time and space, and he wasn't going to pressure her. She called him an idiot. He agreed he probably was. She kissed him. It was deep and sure, pouring months of careful restraint into it. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. He asked where they go from here. She said forward, together, figuring it out as they go. He checked to make sure there were no guarantees. She confirmed there were no guarantees, just honesty, showing up, and choosing each other every day. He said he could do that. She said she could too. 6 months later, Elena stood on the deck of a small sailboat. The wind was in her face, and the city skyline was in the distance. She had bought the boat 3 months ago. It was nothing fancy, just enough to get back out on the water. Adrian sat in the cockpit with his camera in hand, capturing her in her element. He called out that she looked happy. She replied that she was happy, and she meant it. It was the kind of happiness that came from knowing yourself, choosing yourself, and building a life that felt authentic instead of aspirational. She had started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping people who couldn't afford lawyers navigate the system. It wasn't prosecuting criminals, but it was making a difference. She was using her knowledge of how Victor's world worked to help people escape situations like the one she had been in. She helped them understand their rights, their options, and their worth. It felt right, like she had found her way back to the person she meant to be before she got lost in someone else's story. Adrian had finished his transformation series. Elena had seen the photographs. They were images of her sailing, laughing, cooking, and just existing. In every frame, she looked like herself. She wasn't performing or posing, she was just being. She told him he made her look brave when he showed her the final collection. He replied he just showed what was already there. Standing on the boat with the sun warming her skin and the future stretching out uncertain and beautiful, Elena understood what he meant. She had always been this person, she just needed to remember. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. He wrote that Victor was dating again, someone from his world this time, and thought she would want to know. Elena read the message and felt nothing. There was no jealousy, no vindication, and no interest at all. Victor was living his life, and she was living hers. Their paths had diverged, and that was exactly how it should be. She typed back that she hoped he was happy. She added that she was. She put the phone away and looked at Adrian. He was adjusting his camera settings, completely absorbed in his work. This was what partnership looked like. Two whole people choosing to build something together, not two broken pieces trying to complete each other. Adrian asked if she was ready to head back. She said not yet, and suggested they stay out a little longer. They stayed until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As Elena guided the boat back to the marina, she thought about the girl who met Victor at 27. She thought about the woman who signed divorce papers with shaking hands. And she thought about the person she was now. Stronger, messier, and more uncertain about everything except who she was. All of those versions had been necessary. All of those experiences had led her here. The truth was, endings weren't failures, they were just transformations. Victor hadn't destroyed her life. He had just freed her from a version of herself that was never sustainable. The pain had been real, and the grief had been necessary. But what came after was something she never could have found if she stayed. That night, back at her apartment, Adrian made dinner while Elena worked on a case file from the legal clinic. They moved around each other easily and comfortably, two independent people who chose to share space. As they sat down to eat, Adrian mentioned he got offered a gallery show in New York 3 months from now. Elena's face lit up, calling it amazing and asking if he was going to take it. He said he wanted to, but it would mean being gone for a few weeks to set up, do the opening, and network. He worried because things were good with them right now, and he didn't want to disrupt that. Elena gently cut him off and told him to take the show. She assured him she would still be there when he got back. They both had lives outside of the relationship, and that was what made it work. He smiled, relieved, and asked if she was sure. She promised she was sure. She added that it gave her an excuse to visit New York, since she hadn't been in years. He asked if she would come. She said of course she would come. She wanted to see his work in a real gallery and see him in his element. They talked about the show, logistics, timelines, and possibilities. Elena realized this was what she had been missing with Victor. The ability to celebrate each other's successes without feeling threatened. The ability to support without smothering, and to love without losing yourself. Later, lying in bed with Adrian asleep beside her, Elena stared at the ceiling and thought about the future. It was uncertain, unpredictable, and full of variables she couldn't control. But for the first time in her life, that didn't scare her. She had learned something important in the wreckage of her marriage. You couldn't build a life on someone else's foundation. You had to create your own, brick by brick and choice by choice. And if you were lucky enough to find someone who wanted to build alongside you, not for you, and not instead of you, but with you, that was worth holding on to. Victor had taught her what she didn't want. Adrian was helping her discover what she did. But most importantly, she had taught herself that she didn't need anyone to be complete. She was enough on her own. Everything else was just addition, not completion. 3 months later, Elena stood in a New York gallery, surrounded by Adrian's photographs. The Transformation series was the centerpiece. It featured images of her and a dozen other people who had rebuilt their lives from scratch. Survivors, all of them. People who had taken their broken pieces and made something new. Adrian found her standing in front of a photograph of herself at the helm of her sailboat, windblown and laughing. He asked what she thought. She told him he saw her better than she saw herself. He said he just paid attention. She replied that it was the same thing. They stood together, watching people move through the gallery and discuss the work. Someone asked to buy the sailboat photograph. Elena felt a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. Her transformation was on display for strangers to interpret. Adrian asked quietly if she was okay with people buying them, offering to pull them if she wasn't comfortable. She told him to let them buy them. She hoped it might remind someone that endings aren't permanent and that you can start over even when it feels impossible. He asked if that was what she wanted people to take from this. Elena thought about it. She said she wanted them to know that you don't have to stay broken. Healing isn't linear or pretty or easy, but it is worth it. And sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having everything fall apart, because it forces you to figure out who you are when no one is watching. Adrian smiled and called it beautiful. She told him he made it beautiful by showing the truth of it. The show was a success. Critics praised Adrian's work, collectors bought pieces, and Elena found herself telling her story to strangers who saw themselves in her journey. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and proof that vulnerability could be powerful when it was honest. On their last night in New York, Adrian took her to a rooftop bar overlooking the city. They watched the lights blink on as darkness fell, and Elena felt a contentment so deep it scared her. Adrian asked what she was thinking. She told him she was genuinely happy, and that scared her because she kept waiting for something to go wrong. He told her nothing was going to go wrong. She pointed out he couldn't promise that. He agreed he couldn't. He turned to face her and promised he would be there when things did go wrong. He would show up even when it was hard, especially when it was hard, and that was the promise he could make. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She told him that was all she needed. He asked if she meant it. She said yes. They kissed as the city hummed around them. Two people who found each other in the aftermath of separate disasters. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happily ever after, just a choice to keep choosing each other every day. And that was enough. Back home, Elena's life continued to take shape. She enrolled in night classes, working toward a degree in social work. She expanded her volunteer work at the legal clinic. She sailed every weekend, sometimes with Adrian, sometimes alone. She built friendships that had nothing to do with Victor's world. She became someone she recognized and someone she liked. A year after the divorce, Elena got a message from Victor's lawyer. The final paperwork had been processed. Everything was officially and legally settled. Their marriage was a closed file in some courthouse basement, reduced to documents and signatures. She didn't feel sad, and she didn't feel angry. She just felt like a chapter had finally and completely ended. That night, she and Adrian had dinner at their cafe, the one where they met, where everything started. It had become tradition to eat there once a week, a reminder of where they began. Adrian observed she seemed quiet. She said she was just thinking, because the divorce was officially final and all the paperwork was done. He asked how she felt. She smiled and said she felt free. She felt like she could finally stop looking backward and just exist in the present. He said that sounded healthy. She confirmed it felt healthy. She reached across the table and took his hand, thanking him for being patient while she figured it out. He told her she didn't have to thank him for that. She insisted she did. She pointed out he could have walked away 100 times, and most people would have, but he stayed. He told her it was because she was worth staying for. She asked if that was true even when she was a mess. He said especially when she was a mess. Messy people are honest people, and he would take honest over perfect any day. They finished dinner and walked through the city hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of possibility. There would be challenges, fights, and moments of doubt. But there would also be mornings in cafes, photographs, sailing, and choosing each other when it would be easier to walk away. That was what love looked like in the real world. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Elena had spent 7 years trying to be someone she wasn't. She tried to fit into a life that was never meant for her. And when it fell apart, she thought it was the end of everything. But it had been the beginning. It was the beginning of figuring out who she was when she wasn't performing. It was figuring out who she was when she wasn't trying to earn love by disappearing. She finally gave herself permission to take up space. Victor had given her an empire. Adrian gave her space to exist, and in that space she found herself. Looking back, she could see how every moment had been necessary. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, and the grief. All of it had carved away the parts that weren't really her, leaving behind something truer and stronger. She wasn't the girl who met Victor at 27, believing love could conquer anything. She wasn't the wife who slowly disappeared, trying to hold together something already broken. She was something new. A woman who knew her worth, who chose herself first, and who understood that endings could be beginnings if you were brave enough to let them. And standing in the city she once shared with Victor, now building a completely different life in those same streets, Elena understood something fundamental. You couldn't lose yourself if you knew who you were to begin with. Victor hadn't destroyed her. He just revealed the cracks that were always there, forcing her to rebuild from a foundation of truth instead of fantasy. It had hurt. It still hurts sometimes. But the pain had been worth it. Because on the other side of that pain was a life she chose, a love built on honesty instead of intensity, A future shaped by her own hands instead of someone else's vision. And that messy and uncertain and completely utterly real life was exactly what she needed all along.